This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
To The Other Side of Midnight, the Frank Morano Show. James Flippin filling in here on this July 5th. So look, politics all the time, that's a given. Plenty of time to get into politics. And who better to get into politics with than Roger Stone? Of course, legendary political consultant, a guy who hosts a show on 77 WABC from 4 to 6 on Sundays, and also the Stone Zone, his own program on social media. So, Roger, let's put the politics aside for a second. You're also a guy who knows so much about U.S. history. And in particular here, I wanted to take you back to November 1963, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. And in a sort of overarching way, I wanted to ask you, I'm a guy, I just turned 39 years old. I have a lot of interest in the JFK assassination, but I feel like a lot of my peers, a lot of people my age, see it as sort of a done deal. It's answered. It's already figured out. The lone gunman with Lee Harvey Oswald, and we know that already. It's old news. So what do you say, or what would you suggest would be a good sort of overarching way to introduce some people to maybe some other ways of thinking about that incident in American history?
Well, to be honest with you, I guess I have to argue with your initial premise. What's interesting is, despite the fact that the mainstream media, the three national networks, particularly CNN, have continued to push the narrative that Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone nut, a disillusioned communist, acting alone, killed John F. Kennedy, 3 bullets, all from behind. The American people, if you look at the Gallup poll, don't believe that. Most recent polling a couple of years ago, 63% of Americans didn't believe that was true. And of course, there has been a lot of evidence between declassified documents, declassified by the government, and the work of the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1978, where the Warren Commission conclusions have been completely contradicted. So the Warren Commission, as you know, said 2 things: that Lee Harvey Oswald was the killer, he acted alone, there was no conspiracy. They also say that Jack Ruby, who was seen on national television killing Lee Harvey Oswald before he could answer questions, had no known associations with organized crime. Both of those things are, of course, we now know, false. By 1978, largely because Oliver Stone's movie JFK raises so much interest and so many questions about Kennedy's murder, that the Congress was forced to form a new investigation, and that investigation concluded that organized crime was involved in Kennedy's assassination. They didn't go any further in terms of identifying who, what, when, and where, but you can't have it both ways. Either Oswald acted alone, which he didn't, or organized crime was involved. It's important to note that the CIA stonewalled that House investigation, would not provide any documents, would not. Of course, President Donald Trump released a number of the classified documents. In 1997, I believe, the Congress passed the JFK Records Release Act, Presidential Assassination Release Act, which said in 2017, everything that was classified would be up for release. And the only way that could be stopped was if the president objected. Trump, for reasons we now know, released about 80% of that material, all of which continues to lead to the idea that both the Central Intelligence Agency, and President Lyndon Baines Johnson were involved in the assassination. In the end, President Trump held back 20% of the information because CIA Director Mike Pompeo persuaded him that it would reveal the agency's assets and methods. Well, that's an absurdity because this was more than 60 years ago. Everybody involved is dead, no longer involved. Frankly, if the U.S. government was involved in the murder of a president, well, I think the American people need to know that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fast forward to Joe Biden. He gets another shot at the ball because now every year the president has to decide. Mm-hmm. He released another 10%, but still held back 10%. What are they hiding? What they're hiding is the definitive proof that Lee Harvey Oswald was, in fact, a CIA asset. In the first tranche of documents released by Trump, we finally got Lee Harvey Oswald tax records, and guess what? He's got a 1099 from the FBI and a 1099 from the CIA. That's because he was an informant for both of them. Mm-hmm. So go ahead. I'll let you. Let you take it from there.
That voice you're hearing is Roger Stone. Of course, you hear him on Red Apple Networks 4 to 6 p.m. Sundays. Also, the Stone Zone on socials. But Roger, you key in on something there where most people that have dug in on this enough are pretty clear on the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald was an asset for the government, was an agent, right? He goes to the USSR, indicates that he wants to defect there. Then all of a sudden he comes back to the United States, has no problem in doing so. There was reports that he had been spotted in Mexico City, I think, a couple days prior to the assassination, and that he had a whole visa set up to be able to go to Cuba. I mean, how significant are those two things in your mind? You're talking about the ability to potentially see it all in black and white once the documents come out. But I mean, how about that? I mean, how hinky is that, for lack of a better term, that the guy goes, defects what was the number one enemy at the time, the USSR, and then he's going to come back, no problem, no issue with doing so. And then he goes to Mexico City and has this, visa set up to go to Cuba, and nobody at the CIA followed up on that.
Well, it's not as disturbing as the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald has no powder burns, no nitrates on his chest or his arms or his torso. If in fact he had fired a $29 World War II vintage Italian carbine, he would have been covered with nitrate. But according to the Dallas Police Department test, there were no powder burns on Lee Harvey Oswald. That's because he did, as he said, he did not shoot a weapon that day. He didn't. And what does he say when he's marched out in public, which is odd in itself? He said, "I'm a patsy. I didn't kill anybody." He's telling the truth. Mm-hmm. He has been set up as the fall guy. There are so many holes in their narrative. It is impossible for Lee Harvey Oswald to have gotten off 3 shots from the window of the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building, hide the rifle, run down 4 flights of stairs, and be seen in the cafeteria of the Texas School Book Depository building, casually eating his lunch by a Dallas police officer. Not only is he not heard on the wooden staircase, but a woman by the name of, I believe it is Victoria Woods, who was on the staircase between the 6th and the 2nd floor, neither sees, nor more importantly, does she hear Oswald. That's because he wasn't on the 2nd floor. No less than 6 eyewitnesses see a man, according to both the FBI and the Dallas Police Department, see a man in the window of the 6th floor. They describe him as heavy set, heavy to middle set, middle-aged, balding. Every one of them say he is wearing spectacles. They also report a second man who's dark-complected, either African-American or perhaps Native American. That man, whose name is Malcolm Mac Wallace, also left his fingerprints on the cardboard boxes that form the so-called crow's nest from which it is alleged that Kennedy's killer shot. Now, we know that these are Mac Wallace's fingerprints because in 1951, Malcolm Mac Wallace, working in a patronage job at the Agriculture Department arranged for him by Vice President, or at that time, U.S. Senator Lyndon Johnson, was convicted of first-degree murder in Texas. He murdered a man who was in a love triangle with Lyndon Johnson's sister, who was attempting to blackmail Johnson, a man named John Paul Kinzer, I believe it is. So we have the fingerprints there. They were identified by Nathan Darby, who at the time was one of the foremost fingerprint experts in the country. He says that the prints found on the 6th floor, on the cardboard boxes by the 6th floor window, are without any question a match for Malcolm Mac Wallace. I believe that he is one of several shooters. Then, as I'm sure you know, very recently, Paramount Pictures released a documentary featuring the Parkland Hospital doctors, all of whom are still alive with the exception of one physician, all of whom say that when Kennedy gets to Parkland Hospital, they see bullet wounds consistent with his being shot from both the front and the back, meaning that there were multiple shooters, meaning there has to be a conspiracy. So I don't believe that Oswald shot anybody that day. I believe he is set up to take the fall. Malcolm Mac Wallace is at least one of the shooters. I mentioned a dark-complected man who is also there. He is identified as Loy Factor. Loy Factor was recruited as a backup shooter by Mac Wallace, the man who I really believe is the shooter. And the reason I believe that's true is because in his book, Loy Factor describes the physical setup, including a flat saw that was set up to the right of the window from which the shots were fired. There is no way for him to know that construction is going on that floor, and the flat saw is immediately to the right of the window, unless, of course, he was actually there. A man named James Carr, poor fellow, he sees a man who meets the description of Malcolm Mac Wallace fleeing the Texas School Book Depository building, jumping into a Rambler, and being driven away by another man, dark-complected man. Mr. Carr goes to the Dallas police to report this. There are at least 6 attempts on Mr. Carr's life over the succeeding years. He finally has to leave Dallas, relocates to the Middle West. Then he is subpoenaed in District Attorney James Garrison's investigation in New Orleans. When he gets to New Orleans, there's yet another attempt on his life. Unfortunately for them, Mr. Carr was pretty quick on the draw. So he not only shot one of his assailants, but the other one ran. All of these things are in my book. I wrote a book called The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. It's a New York Times bestseller in which I use eyewitness evidence, fingerprint evidence, and deep Texas politics to make the compelling case that it was Lyndon Johnson who was at the head of a cabal that included the Central Intelligence Agency, organized crime, the Secret Service, who certainly deeply involved, and the subsequent cover-up of the FBI, with the whole thing being financed by Big Texas Oil. Now, everyone on that list has their own individual motive for the murder of John Kennedy. Lyndon Johnson's motive is the most acute. He is under investigation in the Billy Sol Estes and the Bobby Baker investigations, two very big corruption investigations then raging in the newspaper. John F. Kennedy tells his personal secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, that Johnson will be dumped from the ticket in 1964 on the way to Dallas on Air Force One. Wow. He told her this, according to her memoirs. And Robert Kennedy has unfortunately, begun telling people that Johnson will be dropped from the ticket and prosecuted. So for Lyndon Johnson, it's kill or be killed, in essence. He was a man staring into the abyss of federal prison.
And how many people really know that, as opposed to just, being power hungry or wanting the brass ring? You're talking about there was real implication, real threat on the other side of that.
I don't think there is any question. There's so many anomalies here. Johnson, who is riding 3 car lengths behind the presidential limousine, based on the newsreel footage and also still photographs, Johnson hits the deck in his limo before the first shot is fired. He also has what appears to be a walkie-talkie or some kind of radio in his hand. So you see a picture of Lady Bird Johnson, Senator Ralph Yarborough, arch enemy of Lyndon Johnson, and Johnson. And then in the next frame, Johnson's missing. That's because he hit the deck. Secret Service agent assigned to him testified to the Warren Commission that after the first shot was fired, he pushed Johnson to the floor of the limousine. After Johnson's death, the agent came forward and said, well, that's what I was told to say. Actually, Johnson hit the deck before the first bullet was fired.
Wow. Talking with Roger Stone, the host of The Roger Stone Show from 4 to 6 p.m. on many of these same networks Sundays. And also you can catch him on the Stone Zone on social media and such. So, Roger, just wanted to close out with kind of a personal connection, a personal story, and ask your thought on that. When my father was in college, he had been investigating, the Vietnam War, and he was opposed to the Vietnam War at the time. And he was looking into the assassination of John F. Kennedy because a lot of things just didn't add up for him around that time. And he was a guy who, back in that era, I guess 1968, 1969, he was in college and doing this investigation. And so he went down to New Orleans and he was going to meet with some people there, but he also wanted to go into the library and start using, some of the materials they had there to do some investigations. So wouldn't you know it, one day he goes to lunch while he's down there, leaves his hotel room. And then when he comes back to his hotel, there were a few maids that were working the rooms and stuff like that. But he notices 2 men come out of his room, kind of make eye contact with him, walk in the opposite direction and not say anything. They left the premises quickly, didn't say anything, didn't want to involve themselves with anybody. My father goes into his hotel room. He finds the waste paper baskets had been overturned. His notes had been gone through. Things had been looked at. And to just kind of connect it a little bit further, my grandfather was a Navy captain, best friends from childhood with John Sherman Cooper, who was a member of the Warren Commission. And my grandfather was still close friends with a number of people with high rank in the Navy at that time. So I always just wondered if maybe it was sort of plausible that some person in the know regarding this conspiracy looked at what my father was doing and all the different kind of things he was unearthing and digging into, knowing that his father was a Navy captain, connected to John Sherman Cooper, who was more or less just a rubber stamp on the Warren Commission. Do you think it's possible that maybe there was some sort of, G-men that was looking into my father's digging at that time?
What year would this have been approximately?
I'm going to say it was 1968.
Yeah, I think that there is a real panic in 1968 for 2 reasons. One, J. Edgar Hoover, as you know, has Dr. Martin Luther King on a wiretap, and he hears King tell Ralph Abernathy, one of his aides, that he is on the verge of endorsing Robert Kennedy for president. Concurrently, Kennedy, running for president in the California primary, speaking to a student audience, is asked, will you reopen the investigation into your brother's murder? Now, Robert Kennedy had always tacitly gone along with the Warren Commission findings, despite the fact that both he and Jacqueline Kennedy had grave reservations about its accuracy and suspected the involvement of both the CIA and Johnson. In that studio audience, Robert Kennedy says, yes, if I'm elected, I will reopen the investigation into my brother's death. Within 3 weeks, both King and Kennedy are assassinated. How long do you think it took J. Edgar Hoover to get those wiretaps on Lyndon Johnson's desk?
Not long.
And the time frame, of course, meets the exact period of time that you speak of. So, yes, I think the government has been very aggressive. particularly in the 60s, in suppressing any alternative view about the Kennedy assassination. I mean, there are so many anomalies here. Malcolm Kilduff is the deputy press secretary for John Kennedy. Pierre Salinger, who was the press secretary, stayed in Washington that fateful day. Kilduff is the man who can be seen on YouTube announcing Kennedy's death. He notes the time. He says President John F. Kennedy passed away. Kilduff says in his memoirs that just after that, he was on the elevator with the new president, Lyndon Johnson, and he says to Johnson, Mr. President, who would do this? Who would do this horrible thing? Who would kill our president? And Johnson looks at him and says, it was a communist, son. He said, sir, what kind of communist? He said, it was a Russian communist, son. The problem with that is that Lee Harvey Oswald has not yet been apprehended. So how does Lyndon Johnson know that John Kennedy was killed by a Russian communist? Just yet another example. And of course, we've all seen the famous picture of Johnson being sworn in on Air Force One with Jackie Kennedy with the blood-stained dress standing next to him. And note that Lady Bird Johnson has a wide grin on her face. The point, of course, is that swearing in has no necessity at all. Johnson automatically legally became president upon the declaration that John Kennedy was dead. He staged that swearing in for two reasons. One, to twist the knife in Bobby Kennedy. He actually calls Bobby Kennedy to ask Bobby Kennedy for the oath of office. Not sure why he needs to know the oath of office other than to twist the knife in Kennedy, who he despised. And then secondarily, he wants the imprimatur of Jacqueline Kennedy, who at that point is dazed, still has blood on her dress. And of course, immediately after Johnson takes the oath, he can be seen winking at one of his cronies, a segregationist Texas Democrat congressman from an adjoining district. So Johnson, if you read my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, by the way, if you do order it, get the paperback version. It has 3 extra chapters. You can get it at stonezone.com, or you can get it at any place books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. But if you go to stonezone.com, of course, you can get a signed copy. But wherever you choose to get it, get the paperback version. It's really quite superior.
That's Roger Stone, legendary political consultant, of course, a radio host and an author. Check that out, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. And we'll also be listening to Roger on Sunday from 4 to 6 here on Red Apple Networks, and also catch the Stone Zone on social media. Roger, thanks so much for taking some time this morning to join us.
Great to be with you. Many thanks.
Fascinating stuff there. I never knew, for example, all the evidence and all the shady stuff surrounding LBJ. I knew, that Lyndon Baines Johnson, the guy who became the president, had a lot of motive to potentially have seen that assassination carried out, but definitely did not know some of that stuff. So unanswered questions, certainly a theme here this morning, and a theme on the other side of midnight. The 2017 Las Vegas shooting. How much do we really know about that? When we come back, I'm going to chat with a guy who was kicked off YouTube for asking questions about the Las Vegas mass shooting. Risky Chrisky will join us next. James Flippin in for Frank Morano on the other side of midnight.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is Greg Kelly for Priority Gold. What does it mean to be America's precious metals dealer? It means that you're in touch with the hearts and minds of those who love this country, value our freedom, and want to protect the future. Priority Gold is that precious metals dealer. They've helped thousands of Americans back their retirement with solid gold and silver. Call Priority Gold at 888-506-6439. Receive free shipping, free storage, a free investment guide, and one of the best purchase experiences in the industry. Call now or go to PriorityGold.com.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
All right, chatting now with Chris Rutkowski, a retired professor, a guy who's a science writer and somebody who's done a lot of research and a lot of investigation into UFOs and unexplained phenomena. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on the Overnight. Happy 4th. Well, actually, I know you're a Canadian, so you guys celebrate Canada Day, but here in the U.S., we've been just getting done celebrating July 4th. But how are you this evening? Thank you for joining us.
Pretty good, and happy 4th to you. We had our July 1st a few days ago.
Yes, and I've been up there for several Canada Day celebrations with my family, which is in Ontario, so a little bit further east than you. But Chris, I wanted to chat. Look, anytime you're on the overnight slot, I'm a radio guy, so I appreciate the chance to kind of delve into the unexplained, the paranormal, the stuff that maybe doesn't get as much coverage during the daylight hours, let's say. And we just passed, speaking of Canada Day, we just passed on July 2nd, World UFO Day, although I believe there's like two of them for whatever reason, but we just passed at least one of the UFO days. And it feels to me like UFOs have become kind of more mainstream in the last year, if you will, maybe 2 years. There's been congressional hearings. We're hearing more and more, I guess, maybe the proliferation of things on social media and stuff like that. But how would you respond to that suggestion? Like, do you think that there is kind of more out there in the last year, maybe year, when it comes to people talking about and reporting on UFOs? All right, so that was a chat that we had earlier tonight with Chris Rutkowski as we explore the issue of aliens, UFOs. We've been talking about assassinations tonight, all this kind of stuff. So shifting gears a little bit, and you can catch that full interview when we podcast later today. Maybe you want to hear a little bit more from Chris Rutkowski and his chat concerning aliens, UFOs. We just passed World UFO Day. But again, to get back into some of the stuff we've been doing with unsolved mysteries that happened here on Earth, we had a chance to talk to Risky Chrisky, a guy who's a YouTuber that got kicked off YouTube for asking questions about things, including the 2017 mass shooting in Las Vegas. Let's get a chance and catch up with him here. James Flippin filling in for Frank Morano. And so, most of the time when I do the news for our home base at Red Apple Media, it's local stories, kind of things of local intrigue, or maybe national stories that rise to the level where we're going to cover that on our news. You don't necessarily get a lot of time to do investigative journalism. But one of the stories that's always kind of stayed with me, haunted me, made me wonder what really happened was the October 1st, 2017 mass shooting at Las Vegas at the Country Music Festival, the concert there. So I hooked up with this guy on social media, fascinating guy who's done a lot of research of his own, Risky Chrisky, who is a former YouTuber, and he was kind enough to join us here tonight to kind of share some of his findings. So Risky, what's going on?
Not much, James. How are you doing tonight?
Doing well. And again, thank you for giving us some time here. One of the things that kind of continuously bothers me about the Las Vegas shooting is that they say Stephen Paddock is this guy who, gunned down 60 people, injured almost, 1,000 people, of course, not just gunfire, but people getting trampled and stuff like that. And yet there's no official motive that's ever been suggested, bandied about, kind of put out there in terms of what drove Stephen Paddock to unleash this carnage. So I ask you, Risky Chrisky, if you've seen anything that makes you feel any type of way about what that could possibly be, or if that lack thereof is a bigger story than people talk about.
Well, just to get into how I even started looking into this, I'm a veteran, and I used to be a 240 gunner. And most of my fellow vets and friends who heard video footage, and I know some people who were there when it happened, they claimed that it sounded like a 240. And so I went down the rabbit hole a little bit, and I found some videos other people have put together, syncing the audio of someone shooting a 240 and overlapped it, and it sounded almost verbatim. Now, that's on certain videos. You get some other police cam footage, and it seems like the rate of fire might be higher. And at face value, that kind of coincides with their narrative of if he had multiple different guns and different calibers with bump stocks, it could potentially have a variable rate of fire. That combined with the echo bouncing off of buildings, it could be confusing. So I understand why it's sort of it's easily overlooked at face value. And I started digging a little bit deeper, and specifically to get some information, just so my notes were correct, talking to you. Mm-hmm. And I stumbled across this guy named John Cullen, and I didn't know about him before. I saw him yesterday online, but I started watching his videos today, and some of the things that I was glossing over, he went into extreme detail. And I don't know if I've ever been more convinced that John, I think his first name is John, but Paddock, I don't think he killed anyone, to be honest. And now this is just my personal belief right now with the information I have at hand. I'm not saying I know one way or the other, but the anecdotal evidence just seems overwhelming. And even if like 1 to 5% of it is true, what I'm about to go into, it completely shatters what we've been told. So, just at face value, some of the initial questions I have were like there's no motive. The rate of fire sounds like a 240 Bravo. Mm-hmm. This guy... And
a 240, just to interject, Risky, that's basically like an outright machine gun that's got like the little tripod thing that it sits on, right? Like that's
more or less like a modern M60 that Rambo used. So it's a larger caliber, 7.62, and it's slower rate of fire. So that matched up with some of the audio clips and videos coming out of Vegas.
Okay.
That combined with the lack of CCTV video, since we're talking Vegas, right? They have cameras literally everywhere in these casinos.
Yeah.
How did he get the stuff up there without drawing attention? His brother, he did an interview saying he's like, I don't know why he did it either. And then I think the next day or shortly thereafter, the feds found terabytes worth of CP on his Windows 95 computer, which just seemed odd. And then the hurricane windows, him busting those out with a hammer or whatever he had, it just seemed a little off. I do some firefighting stuff, and I have some experience in technical rescue taking those windows out, and it's way more difficult than somebody would think. It can be done. Right. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it just seems a little off. So I look into this John Cullen guy and his videos because he started commenting. I posted a few of those synced up audio clips, and he was commenting like, I've already gone over this, and he posted a few YouTube videos, and I clicked and I just went down the rabbit hole, and I cannot believe the level of detail that he went into. And it's not just us saying, hey, this sounds like that machine gun, so that means nothing happened. Like every aspect of this is incredible. So one thing I didn't know, there were 3 other women that were registered to his room. And in Vegas, you have to show an ID to be registered. This was all caught on police body camera, and they blurred out the last names, but a woman named Joanne, another one Katie, and another one Laura. Their IDs on file, so the police had this, were registered to his room.
You're talking about Paddock's room?
To Paddock's room, and there were 5 keys to his room on the table, like the little mini bar in his room, in the police body cam footage. So that's kind of odd, is it not? There were 3 other women there. So just to boil it down, what John Cullen thinks, and this lines up with what I would think, he thinks it's sort of a honeypot. Fast forward to the end, long story short, I think this was a setup they set Paddock up in order to steal weapons from him in an assassination attempt on Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince. And I know that's a wild leap, but if you just bear with me, I'll kind of connect some dots here.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a theory that I've heard before. We're chatting with Risky Chrisky here on the other side of midnight. James Flippin filling in for Frank Morano. So, yeah, why don't you lay it out a little bit? Some of that connection allegedly to a assassination plot and what might be happening there that night in terms of your theory where Stephen Paddock is being framed or used as sort of a patsy, maybe.
Yeah, and I glossed over. I heard the theory about an assassination attempt many times, and I just never took the time to look into it. And once I did, I don't know if there's no going back now. So what I think happened is these women, maybe one in particular, met with him, maybe found him at the range there and said, hey, I've got these billionaires, right? And when I say billionaires, these Saudis that were in the Crown Prince's family. There was a coup that took place, right? So this guy is like 31 years old, the Mohammed bin Salman. I'll call him MBS.
Right.
So MBS is there. He's coming into power. And the old regime, there's a huge sect of them that don't want to follow this. They're not into it at all. So like more or less a coup attempt is taking place. He drives his minivan to Vegas. He's got 20-something guns with him, 100 pounds of tannerite, and he takes it all up to his room. Right. So what the theory is that he was told he could get paid or whatever. He could go shoot these guns out in the desert. Right. He didn't use 100 pounds of tannerite in the attack. So what makes more sense? He left the 100 pounds of tannerite in there, didn't use it, had all these guns up in his room, or he was taking them up there to show to somebody and they were going to go down and they were going to shoot the next day in the desert. Now, if I'm going to go and bring a bunch of guns to go shoot in the desert, I'm not going to leave them in the car, in the parking garage, right? I don't want somebody to break in and steal them. Mm-hmm. So him taking them in there is not a bad idea as far as keeping them secure, especially if you're going to show them to somebody. So that kind of covers him getting him in there. And the fact that I have questions surrounding how did he do it without drawing attention to it, right? But if you put him in duffel bags, stuff like that, I think it's possible. So then, fast forward, he was in room 32-135. So floor 32, room 135. This is on the north end of the building, on the end cap. So it's like basically two rooms kind of joined together. There was, on any of the footage that you can see, there's no visible muzzle flashes coming from that room. So eyewitnesses said, some of them said they saw gunfire up there. There's a theory there could have been a strobe put in place, but that'll make more sense in a second. So the shooting happens at like 10:05. So then SWAT, and there's body cam footage, but there's only one camera body cam footage from the SWAT team that they released from inside this room. Yeah. And when they break in, I'm not going to mention the officer's name. You can go watch all of John Cullen's videos, and he goes into extreme detail. One of the officers, he says, drop it. Let me see your hands. And then immediately shoots. Then they go into the room, and one of the officers, they're talking on the radio, and one of the guys on the radio, a SWAT team member outside of the building, says, is that you? I'm paraphrasing here. Is that you guys in the room with the broken out window? One of the officers goes to the window and looks and confirms the window is not broken at all. So he had to, and if you look at the pictures from the FIT report later, the crime scene photos, there was over 1,000 casings on the ground and broken glass everywhere. So this guy in the footage that we have would have had to step over all of this stuff, which he didn't. He didn't notice any of it. He goes, pulls the curtain. No, the window's not broken. Right. Then the cops come over back on the radio and say, well, we have movement in one of these other windows that's broken out, which is odd. So another thing, they also caught glimpses of the helicopters in the background. And these helicopters, based on, there's multiple facets, flight radar, publicly available flight radar, they weren't the three that would have been in the area: the Maverick, the Sundance, which are like tour helicopters, privately owned, and then the LVMPD. So based on the rules and how they do things there, they take certain flight patterns. They can only go 90 knots or whatever. Okay. They got to be above 500 feet.
So they'd know, in essence, they would know who all these different helicopters are and they're accounted for. It's not like there's just private helicopters flying around.
And so the LVMPD, they turned off their GPS, their trackers sometimes when they got low, but it was really low, like 200 feet. And there was more than one helicopter seen. So there was 3, potentially 5 that were seen. And I'll touch on that in a minute. So basically what John Cullen puts together, again, long story short, is that Paddock was set up before the shooting even started, and he was killed before 10:05 when the shooting started. So he assumes that the assassins that were there to kill MSB came to his door, shot him in the chest. Now that's important because he had the photos released. He shot himself in the mouth. And if you look on the search warrant, it even says in there that about him being shot in the mouth. Now that kind of conflicts with some of the police body cam footage. And it almost makes it as if they moved that. And again, I'm not trying to get sued here like Alex Jones, but it would appear maybe that somebody moved his body and that he was dead and he was taped or propped up in a chair with a rifle under his arm, kind of pointed at the door. So when SWAT kicks in the door, they see a guy in a chair with a rifle pointed at him. They shoot him.
They're going to naturally fire.
Yep. And then that also coincides with there's differing blood stains behind his head. In the photos, one part of it looks older, and then there's brighter, redder blood on top of that. So they leave.
And let me just interject for a second here. Risky Chrisky is the voice you're listening to, a guy a former YouTuber who, to his point, what he was talking about, got kicked off YouTube because of the stuff he was talking about. Now, bring it all together a little bit, because the idea that there was some other shooter or shooters that were participating that night, and then potentially some helicopter that we can't necessarily account for that's involved, and you're talking about a whole assassination attempt. I mean, is the implication that people that were involved in some attempt at an assassination, things went badly, and then they kind of had to shoot their way out, and then maybe they also took a helicopter away? This is a big leap. I'm trying to kind of connect all the dots, but you tell me. We're chatting with Risky Chrisky here on the other side of midnight. So, help me to understand kind of where it goes from the thought that maybe Stephen Paddock was killed and that he didn't even fire any shots that night.
So it goes back to, I believe he was killed before the shooting started. He had, and this is on the body cam footage as well. He had, one of the officers says, there's a duffel bag full of loaded AK mags. On the FIT report, it says he had AR-15s, AR-10s, and one .308 bolt action. It doesn't say anything about AK-47s. So fast forward to 9:47 p.m. and there's a video. So this is before the attack started. There's video from people at that festival, and you can see a few floors above him what appears to be multiple muzzle flashes, literally like 4 floors above him on the same area where he's at. Now, it goes Mandalay Bay up to like the 35th floor, and it changes to the Four Seasons. So who has a bunch of stock in the Four Seasons? At the time, 45% was like Bill Gates. The other 45%, I don't have the guy's name here, but it was one of the people involved, and which is kind of wild when you look at it later. So there was no glass broken when the police entered that room. However, there was glass broken on the end room, and they found the .308 bolt action and 8 casings there. They later said that all 8 casings were accounted for, and that 2 of them hit these jet fuel containers. Well, if you look beyond the jet fuel containers, it seems kind of weird because these are like 35 feet tall and 75 feet wide. They're huge. Couldn't miss them. It's Department of Homeland Security and the company that sends people to Area 51. That airliner is all right, literally directly behind it, almost as if whoever was shooting that bolt action was aiming for a VIP or maybe somebody trying to escape via that terminal right there, which is very interesting. We look at an AK possibly being stolen, or AKs being stolen from his room, which were never listed. That duffel bag of AKs, as they said in the police body cam footage, was never accounted for on the FIT police report. So also, you have from that room, multiple of those gunshots from that .308 bolt-action rifle were caught on camera. So you can see muzzle flashes and you can hear single shots coming from there. But not any footage that I've seen shows any muzzle flashes coming from room 32-135. They come from the 32-134, which is the adjacent room that he had the bolt-action in.
And is the bolt-action from that distance, with the proper outfitting or whatever? I mean, would you describe that as as a sniper rifle?
I don't know what kind it was. It could be, depending on the scope. It's not like a super powerful sniper rifle, if that's what you want to say. It was kind of like mediocre.
But based on where they were shooting, would they need to have a super powered sniper rifle?
No, Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, why would you pick that to shoot if let's say Paddock is not the shooter? Are they shooting at that to blow it up, or are they shooting at something beyond that? And when you look at some of these, and I'll talk about those in a second, the flight radar and eyewitness reports, it would almost, I assume that MSB made his escape, and there's video footage allegedly of him being surrounded by SWAT and security personnel leaving the Tropicana across the street shortly after 9:47, going over to what we can assume to be that area to get airlifted out in an exfil operation. So it would almost make sense that they were trying to shoot whatever was back there, and if he was the target, they're kind of in a last-ditch effort. So we think it's an assassination attempt on Mohammed bin Salman. Took place in the Four Seasons, a few stories above Paddock's room, around 9:47. The shooting didn't take place until 10:05.
Let me ask you this. So we're chatting with Risky Chrisky, former YouTuber who knows a lot about this Las Vegas shooting.
If you want to add this, and this only takes 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Remember a few years ago, there was that guy in Saudi Arabia who got chopped to pieces in the consulate there?
Yes.
He was the guy responsible who owned 45%. He was the dissident and in the family. It was done. They killed him a year to the minute of that attack.
Wow. Khashoggi you're talking about.
Yep, exactly.
Wow. That's crazy. Wow, that's really crazy. Risky Chrisky, a former YouTuber, a guy who's done a lot of deep dive on this Las Vegas shooting and just fascinating stuff there. Again, maybe someday we'll know more in terms of an official account, maybe not. But I find that the people that I connect with on social media, most of the time when it comes to this investigative journalism type work, they really know what they're talking about and they've done the legwork. So thank you, Risky. Really appreciate the time tonight.
No problem. Thank you.
And on the other side of midnight, as I'm filling in for Frank Morano here, James Flippin. When we come back, we've got 5 passive-aggressive phrases that you really shouldn't use, according to the Huffington Post. Well, I use some of them. James Flippin in for Frank Morano.
The other side of midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
It's The Other Side of Midnight. Frank Morano Show. We're talking about aliens and UFOs. It's the other side of midnight. The Frank Morano Show. What a jam! James Flippin in for Frank Morano on this day after July 4th. So look, if you're going to be traveling this weekend, and many of you are, keep in mind that the Biden administration has made some changes to how you get refunds for canceled flights. Now, if your flight is canceled, airlines these days are required to provide refunds for customers, even if the cancellation is due to weather. Delays are a little bit trickier because they typically have to meet certain criteria for relief, such as refunds or compensation. The carriers will often give customers the chance to switch to alternative flights if available at no cost. But just keep in mind, when these airlines are giving you the business after any canceled flights here, and hopefully not in the bulk of our listening area, because it looks like maybe the weather shouldn't be too bad around the weekend, but just keep in mind, they're supposed to give you cash refunds, so don't settle for anything less. Now, the Huffington Post has a list out of the most passive-aggressive phrases that you should try to avoid using. I have to admit, I think I use a lot of these. One is, I'm sorry you feel that way. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of passive-aggressive, but at the same time, I'm sorry you feel that way. It's a kind of, innocuous way to maybe neutralize the debate. This one's very passive-aggressive. It's fine. It's fine. Let's see, what are the other ones? Good for you. Oh, good for you. That's just being a jerk. That's not passive-aggressive. Whatever. That's passive-aggressive. If you say so. Yeah, that's pretty bad. You're just too sensitive. Well, you, the listening audience, are anything but sensitive. You're inspiring. I love you. And I'll see you next time, because it's James Flippin filling in for Frank Morano. Good day.
Economists warn that massive tax hikes could devastate your IRA and 401k as the stock market braces for impact. I'm Larry Kudlow, and I urge you to fortify your savings with physical gold with my friends at Priority Gold. To learn how gold and silver can help diversify your savings, please call 1-800-405-GOLD or just visit PriorityGold.com to get a free gold information guide. That's 1-800-405-GOLD.